ऊपर करो, क्या कर रहे हो? चौथा में ले जाओ। जन्मावे मोहे इच्छा जो दे तोर जन्मावे जन्मावे मोहे इच्छा जो दे तोरा जन्म आर बाकता गृह जने जन्माओ मोर बाकता गृह जने कीट जन्म हो जता तुहा दास कीट जन्म आर बहिर मुख जन्म बहिर मुख ब्रह्मा जन्मे नाई आस बहिर मुख ब्रह्मा जन्मे नाई हर मानस देह गेह जो किछ मोर अर्पिनु तुहा पदे नंद किशोर मानस देह भुक्ति मुक्ति स्पृहा विहीन जे भक्त भुक्ति मुक्ति स्पृहा विहीन जे भक्त भुक्ति मुक्ति स्पृहा विहीन जे भक्त आर लाभाइते ताको संगय अनुरक्त लाभाइते ताको जनक जननी दहित तनय जनक आर जनक जननी दहित तनय आर प्रभु गुरुपति तुहु सर्वमय बकति विनुद कहे सुन shunakana bhakti Thakur bhakti vinuda kahe shunakana bhakti vinuda Radhanath tu amar parana
Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyo cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Today we're continuing with the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, chapter entitled A Very Nice Saintly Person by His Holiness Satsvarup Maharaj. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was often traveling, and Abhay was busy with his family and business, so to arrange another meeting was not possible. Yet from their first encounter, Abhay had considered Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati his spiritual master, and Abhay began thinking of him always. I have met such a nice saintly person. Whenever possible, Abhay would seek out Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples, the members of the Gaudiya Math. So this is the early pioneering time also of the Gaudiya Math for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He was constantly traveling to open new temples. As soon as his disciples would become trained, he would send them out. He sent them to North India. He sent them to Puri to open the Purushottam Math. He sent them to Kurukshetra, to Cuttack, to Dhaka, and he was constantly traveling to these places also to make sure that things were going on nicely, just as Srila Prabhupada used to do. You'll see a direct correlation between everything that Prabhupada did that he learned from his spiritual master. So at this time, Prabhupada being a young grihasta, he had married 3 years before, he now had one child, and a very responsible young man as well. So he was thinking, how am I going to serve as a grihasta in the Gaudiya Math? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wasn't present always in Calcutta, so he couldn't get his association. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had very strict concept of how the grihastas should serve within the math. When Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was in Mayapur, he only had young men students who eventually became his disciples. And then he made one sannyasi, Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha Maharaj. Then when he opened his center at the Bhakti Vinod Asan at 1 Ultadingi Junction Road, in order to pay the rent, one of the floors was given to 4 grihasta couples. And the women, of course, lived with their husbands there in the math. the brahmacharis lived on another floor, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati lived upstairs. But one of the women died. And when she died, it was decided that all the women would move out of the temple. And from then on, no more women would be in the temple. Now, in any of the temples, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's principle was that the grihastas, they also have to be like vairagis. Nothing should be taken from the temple. Even when the grihastas would come to the temple and pick the flowers from the temple garden, he would stop them. He said, nothing, you should not take anything, you should be offering to the temple. And if they were doing service, it should be entirely voluntary. And whatever income they had, up to, it didn't have to be 50%, but up to 50% they should arrange to give. So these grihasta disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, yes, they were giving, they were paying for the rent of the Bhaktivinoda Asan, the Gaudiya Math, but now they were living outside. And Srila Prabhupada, now being a young married man with not only he had a son, he had his father, and his elder sister, she had become a widow. So he had a lot of financial responsibility with a job that could just barely pay for all the expenses. As for Gandhi's movement, Gandhi had suffered a bitter setback when his non-violent followers had blundered and committed violence during a protest. The British had taken the opportunity to arrest Gandhi and sentence him to 6 years in jail. Although his followers still revered him, the nationalist movement had lost much of its impetus. But regardless of that, Abai was no longer interested. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had defeated his idea that the nationalist cause was India's first priority. He had invoked Abai's original Krishna consciousness, and Abai now felt confident that Bhaktisiddhanta's mission was the real priority. So what happened in February 1922, just around the time when Prabhupada came for the first time to the Gaudiya Math, there was a non-violent, because all of Gandhi's processions, all of his, whatever he was arranging, his campaigns, were non-violent. So in the locality of Gorakhpur, hundreds of his followers had come for a non-cooperation, non-violent protest. Because, you see, the British, they had arranged full control of India by then. And they were using the Indians to keep this control. The Indians were the soldiers, they were the policemen, they were the lawyers, the judges, and it was the Indians, under the direction of the British, that were keeping the other Indians under control. So by these nonviolent protests, Gandhi felt that he could make some progress. But the British were not nonviolent. When this campaign happened in Gorakhpur, the British soldiers came out and started shooting all of the people. So the people, they then became violent, and they surrounded the entire police barracks and set it on fire. And 22 policemen were burned to death, and 3 civilians. Now this gave the British a great opportunity to completely crush Gandhi's movement. And within a month, because Gandhi at that time, even now we're hearing there's something called Young India, a newspaper. You've all heard of Young India? Young India was the mouthpiece, just like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had the Gaudiya, he had Nadia Prakash. So Young India, Gandhi used to write articles about non-cooperation, how we have to have Swarajya, all of his principles, based on Bhagavad Gita somehow or other. So the British then, they took this opportunity to arrest Gandhi, and they gave him a 6-year jail sentence. Now Churchill and the other leaders in England, They were very happy about this. They felt, on surface, they treated Gandhi respectfully, but they felt that he was a bad influence. And Gandhi, when he was put in jail, he would go on fasting. He fast until death, like that. So Churchill said, he said, fine, let the man die, because if we lose India, the entire British civilization will be ruined. That's how important India was for the UK. Now, Churchill's concept was that there are beastly people with the beastly religion. He personally said, I hate Indians. So he had no compassion whatsoever for the Indian people. When there were famines here, he said it was the fault of the Indian people because they had children like rabbits, so many children, that they should stop having so many children. But what he actually did was, he took all of the foodstuffs and took that to England. So it was just terrible what was going on for the people in India at the time. But Srila Prabhupada, after meeting Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, now realized that this movement of non-cooperation of Gandhi, and here was the proof of it, was not working, because now Gandhi was in jail for 6 years. He couldn't, actually, they only made him stay in jail for 2 years. But by that time, his movement was crushed, because while he was in jail, nobody could do anything. And the police, as soon as they tried to do anything, they would just start shooting. So it was a terrible situation on that side. And Prabhupada was saved from this by meeting his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He had invoked Abhai's original Krishna consciousness, and Abhai now felt confident that Bhaktisiddhanta's mission was the real priority. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had invited him to preach, and from that moment, Abhai had wanted to join the Gaudiya Math as one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples. But now, instead of his political inclinations, it was his family obligations that stood in the way. He was no longer thinking, first let us become an independent nation, then preach about Lord Chaitanya. Now he was thinking, I cannot take part like the others. I have my family responsibilities. So Srila Prabhupada, at this point in his life, later, when he was in Bombay, he was reminiscing this time in his life. And he said that this marriage that was arranged by Gormohan Day, they were so careful in the marriages. They would search for 7 generations on both sides to make sure that there were no family links. That's how careful they were, because they wanted the perfect marital relationship. And Prabhupada, he explained that there were girls who fell in love with him. He said one of his friends, she was a Kashmiri beautiful girl, and she fell in love with Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said especially she loved his harmonium playing. So even at that time, as a young unmarried boy, Prabhupada, he told the devotees, he said he never fell under the influence of a woman. He was never captured by Maya. And that was why, when he was invoked by his father to marry someone that he had no attraction for, his father said, this will be very good for your spiritual life. So Prabhupada said he was always very dutiful in all of his work, in all of his business, and all of his responsibilities. But when he first got married, he became neglectful, because at that time he was a student. He said, yes, in the beginning of his marriage he was neglectful, but then when he met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he neglected his wife because he wanted to take part. And he could not understand how he was going to fulfill both his family responsibilities and help his spiritual master in preaching. And the family was growing. In 1921, Abai and his wife had had their first child, a son. And there would be more children, and more income would be needed. Earning money meant sacrificing time and energy, and it meant, at least externally, being distracted from the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Indian culture had the highest regard for the family institution, and divorce was unheard of. Even if a man was in great financial difficulty, he would remain with his wife and children. Although Abai expressed regret at not being a sannyasi disciple in the Gaudiya Math, he never seriously considered leaving his young wife that so early in their marriage. Gaur Mahan was pleased to hear of his son's attraction to a Vaishnav guru, but he never expected Abai to abandon responsibilities and enter the renounced order. Now actually, Srila Prabhupada, he admitted about himself that he could not tolerate anxieties. If there was any type of anxiety in his family life, it was just unbearable for him. And for that reason, he could not enjoy his family life. Now, in the material world, we have to tolerate so many inconveniences just for a little bit of happiness in family life. But Prabhupada, having a spiritual background, he could not tolerate this family life. He wanted to take the spiritual life. And his family, particularly his wife, didn't cooperate with him. So it became an unbearable situation for him. But he never thought of leaving his wife. He knew it was his responsibility. Now he was married. He had one son, that was Mathura Mohan, and there would be another one coming. A Vaishnav could remain with wife and family, practice spiritual life at home, and even become active in preaching. Abai would have to find ways to serve the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as a family man. Now, this is the second generation after Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. We know that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had 14 children, and a family man, a responsible government officer. And at that time, within the Bengali culture, it was understood that one should be a grihastha. There was no brahmachari life at that time because the Gaudiya Math hadn't started yet. So people were grihasthas. And it was the opinion that before you even thought of taking sannyas, first you had to become a grihastha. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati changed all of that. He said there's no reason to first become a grihastha. One can remain a brahmachari and then become a sannyasi. And therefore he set up these brahmachari ashrams. But he made sure the brahmacharis lived very, very austerely. He made no accommodations for them. They would sleep in the temple. Or he would make very shoddy little mud huts because he didn't want them to have snug proprietorship. And he would call them, when they would become attached to their possessions and to their comfortable living, he would call them Babu Brahmacharis. And he would also call them Matuas. That was an Ordi expression. And he would call them Matmedas instead of Grihamedis, Matmedis. So he was very much opposed to the brahmacharis living a comfortable life. And he gave one example of brahmachari life. He said, you wake up, you cook, you eat, you wash the pots, and you go to sleep. And then you wake up again, you cook, you eat, you wash the pots, and you go to sleep again. He said, no, we don't want a life like that. So he was training his brahmacharis to be preachers. He would send them out with the Nadia Prakash. He would send them out to open temples all alone. And this is where Prabhupada got his momentum. Although he was a grihastha, he saw how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself was constantly traveling, and he was sending his brahmacharis out to open new temples. Abai thought that if he were to become very successful in business, Then he could spend money not only to support his family, but also to help support Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's mission of spreading Krishna consciousness. An astrologer had even predicted that Abai would become one of the wealthiest men in India. But with his present income, he could do little more than provide for his family's needs. He thought he might do better by trying to develop a business on his own. Now, we have to remember that Prabhupada was born into a Suvarnavanik family. His father was a cloth merchant. He was a successful businessman who was able to maintain a large family, and constantly 4 to 5 people a day he would feed on top of that. So Prabhupada had that mentality. He knew how to make money. And the astrologers were so perfect at that time. Later, Prabhupada said, because when Prabhupada was sick, devotees were going all over to all the big astrologers to get Prabhupada's chart made. Would he survive? Would he die? When would he die? Every single astrologer by that time, in 1977, not a single one got it right. But when Prabhupada's nakshatra was done, at this time when he was born, it was exactly said, he would become one of the wealthiest men in India, which he became, opening the ISKCON temples all over the world. And not only that, it said at that time that he would only live to 80. And Prabhupada told the devotees, if I live beyond the age of 80, then that is a special blessing of Krishna, because according to my chart, I'm supposed, so Prabhupada, he lived till 81. So he just gave us that extra time to be with him and serve him after the age of 80. And he gave another example, that Dr. Bosch, who was his employer, Dr. Bosch's son had gone to live in Germany. Of course, Dr. Bosch treated Abai just like a son. So he was very concerned, when is his son coming back? And he consulted a very, very expert Brahmin astrologer. And the astrologer said, your son is not coming back. He's going to go to a hill station. Just after that, a letter came from Dr. Bosch's son. He said, I've contracted spinal tuberculosis, and I must go to Switzerland. And that was it. So this is how exact the astrologers were. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, also being a great astrologer, he was able to, he understood this entire science. Therefore, he set up the Panjika for us, which we're still following today. We still follow the Navadvip Panjika in ISKCON. Abai expressed his feelings to Dr. Bosch, who listened like a sympathetic father, and suggested that Abai become his agent for all of northern India. Because at that time, Prabhupada was being employed by Dr. Bosch as a manager. Although he had huge responsibilities, he would be signing blank checks, and he was, more than the other managers, he was given the closest responsibility to Dr. Bosch. But he wasn't independent. So Dr. Bosch, seeing that Prabhupada wanted to make money in order to help the medicines, liniments, rectified spirits, toothpastes, and other items wholesale from Dr. Bosch's factory, and travel widely throughout northern India, building up his own business. Also, Abai had enough experience with Bosch's laboratory that he could try to make and market some of his own medicines and products. Dr. Bosch and Abai decided that the centrally located city of Allahabad would be a good place for Abai to make his headquarters. So Dr. Bosch, he was also thinking of expanding. And here he saw a very intelligent, business-minded, educated young man who was qualified to take his business to all of northern India. And Abai was willing to do that because he knew that he would be successful. He already knew. And when he did go, he was a great success. Now, he told a secret about Dr. Bosch. Dr. Bosch's laboratory produced many, many different types of medicines. We hear toothpaste, liniments, rectified spirits. But Dr. Bosch himself only used 3 medicines. He used castor oil, he used quinine, and he used manganese salt. And if he ever got sick, he would simply stop working for 3 days and only take one of these 3 things. He said all the other things was just money-making business. So as a doctor, he knew what worked. And I saw also Prabhupada, when he would get sick, he wouldn't take medicine. He would call for his castor oil. We'd bring in his castor oil for him. He would follow the same principles. So Prabhupada, though he was selling and he was also producing his own medicines, this was for business purposes. As we heard a few weeks ago, even Dr. Bosch, he admitted that he had sinned because when he got a hold of a wealthy client, he would give them so many medicines and prolong the treatment as long as he could. So he admitted it. So Abai at this point, he was being encouraged. Now you go on your own, you become independent. In 1923, Abai and his wife and child moved to Allahabad, a 12-hour train ride northwest from Calcutta. The British had once made Allahabad the capital of the United Provinces. United Provinces later became Uttar Pradesh. They're both UP. So Allahabad, even to this day, Allahabad is, our high court is in Allahabad. We have to take all of our big cases to Allahabad. It's still the capital of UP. So then it was United Provinces. And they had built many good buildings there, including buildings for a high court and a university. Now, during this Bhadra Purnima, I'm sure you'll all be happy to know that within the University of Allahabad, we just put 10 sets of Srimad Bhagavatams in each of their departments. Yes. We have one devotee there who was he knew everyone. He knew all the professors, all the department heads, and each one of them, they're all devotees. And actually our ISKCON is there, and they go to ISKCON, they go to Mayapur, they go to our temples in the West also. So they all gladly accepted our Srimad Bhagavatams. Yes. Excuse me? Yes, within the last month. It couldn't happen all in one day. Europeans and affluent Indian families like the Nehrus lived in a modern, paved, well-lit section of town. There was also another older section with ancient narrow streets closely lined with buildings and shops. You can show the pictures now. This devotee who's in Allahabad, I asked him to take pictures of the places where Prabhupada lived and also his Prayag pharmacy. So we get to see that. Many Bengalis resided there, and it was there that Abai decided to settle his family. So Prabhupada explained that Allahabad, which is now called Prayagraj, he called it Rajatirtha. He said that it is the holiest of spots, and since time immemorial, it has been a holy place. Since the time of Mohini Murti, he said. And the place where Prabhupada chose to live, this is his residence, 60 Badshahi Mandi. Of course, this was 99 years ago, so it must have been very beautiful at that time. Now it's quite run down. But you can see all the narrow streets going into that part of the city. And it's all, the Sangam, let's say the Sangam is here, our ISKCON temple is here, the Gaudiya Math is here, and Prabhupada's, his residence and his pharmacy were right here, all in the old part, right near the Sangam, where all the action is going on for the Kumbh Mela and the Magh Mela. He had chosen Allahabad, traditionally known as Prayag, as a good location for business. but it was also one of India's most famous places of pilgrimage. Situated at the confluence of the three holiest rivers of India, the Ganges, the Jamuna, and the Saraswati, Allahabad was the site of two of India's most widely attended spiritual events, the annual Magh Mela and the Kumbh Mela, which took place every 12 years. And in search of spiritual purification, millions of pilgrims from all over India would converge here each year at the time of the full moon in the month of Magh, January, and bathe at the junction of the three sacred rivers. So here's the Sangam, here's the Jamuna. So Prabhupada's house was on the side of the Jamuna, and then here was the Ganga coming down to the Sangam, right? So this Magh Mela, ISKCON always makes sure that we take part in both of the melas, because if you take part in the Magh Mela, then the committee gives you a good spot in the Kumbh Mela every 12 years. So we have our Magh Mela camp also every year during the Magh, the month of Magh, going on for the different bathing times. So this very holy place, and this tradition is still going on. So this is 1923. The next big Kumbh Mela was going to be in 1930. So Prabhupada, he moved there, but he didn't have any association at that time anymore with the Gaudiya Math, because the Gaudiya Math hadn't come there yet to establish their center. We'll read on when they come there. Abai's home at 60 Badshai Mandi, can you show the picture again? Consisted of a few rented rooms. Yes, so they're on the first floor there. For his business, he rented a small shop in the commercial center. That's a close-up of the house. Next. Yes, this is Prayag Pharmacy. He rented a small shop in the commercial center of the city at Johnson Gung Road, where he opened his dispensary, Prayag Pharmacy, and began selling medicines, tinctures, syrups, and other products manufactured by Bose's laboratory. He met an Allahabad physician, Dr. Ghosh, who was interested in a business partnership. So Abai asked him to become his attending physician and move his office to Prayag Pharmacy. Dr. Ghosh consented and closed his own shop, Tropical Pharmacy. Dr. Ghosh remained a close friend of Srila Prabhupada up until the very end. And when Prabhupada became ill, he sent the devotees to find Dr. Ghosh. He was no longer in Allahabad. He had moved to Kodaikanal. And he was making a whole village there because he wanted Prabhupada to come there and set up a Varnashram village. Prabhupada called him here to Vrindavan, and Dr. Ghosh tried to treat him. Prabhupada was a very, very bad patient because he didn't take medicine. He did whatever he wanted to do. He said, "We are not Dr. Das, we are Krishna Das." So when Dr. Ghosh diagnosed him, he checked his all vital organs, everything. He checked his aura. He checked everything that he knew, both naturopathic and allopathic. And then he told the devotees, "Your spiritual master is suffering because he's in so much anxiety about the devotees and the movement." And Prabhupada said, "Yes, that is the correct diagnosis." But then later, he said, because Prabhupada refused all of his treatments, he wanted him to go for dialysis, he wanted him to take injections. Prabhupada would not go to any hospital whatsoever. He said, "Even if I die and I'm unconscious, do not take me to a hospital." So Dr. Ghosh finally, he said, "There's nothing I can do because all of his organs now are full of urea, and unless he gets dialysis, I can't help him. So the only thing that you should do as his disciples is you keep him comfortable, you let him eat whatever he wants, and do not engage him in any management." So that's exactly what the devotees did, and Prabhupada was very happy with that until the very end. At Prayag Pharmacy, Dr. Ghosh would diagnose patients and give medical prescriptions, which Abai would fill. Dr. Ghosh would then receive a 25% commission from the sale of the prescriptions. Abai and Dr. Ghosh became friends. They would visit at each other's home, and they treated each other's children like their own family members. Often they discussed their aspirations for increasing profits. Now also, while Prabhupada had this pharmacy, there were other young men, because the Allahabad University was there, there were many Sanskrit colleges. So one young man, his name was O.B.L. Kapoor, he was a student. He happened to meet Prabhupada. And he was so impressed by Srila Prabhupada. Of course, this was a little later when the devotees came and they were setting up the temple. He was so impressed. Now, Prabhupada used to give him different formulas. Because he was a student, Prabhupada gave him a formula for brain tonic. He said, you take this during your examination. So O.B.L. Kapoor, he took it and he did very well in his exams. And he went and thanked Prabhupada. And then he said, but I would like to have that formula that you take, the one for Krishna Prem. And Prabhupada said, yes, I know the formula, but I have not yet procured it. And when I have made it, I will give it to you. And then later he told O.B.L. Kapoor, actually later O.B.L. Kapoor took Diksha from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. His name was Adi Keshav Das. So then Prabhupada told him later, he said, no, Mr. Kapoor, Dr. Kapoor asked him, he said, well, can you tell me the formula if it's not a secret? He said, yes, I will tell you the formula. The formula is Trinadapi Sunichena Taroriva Sahishnuna. So that was Prabhupada's formula for Krishna Prem. And he said, and I'm going to take this formula and I'm going to distribute it all over the world. So even then in Allahabad, Prabhupada was always thinking of how he was going to spread this mission and fulfill his spiritual master's instruction. Another person that he met at that time, most of you wouldn't know him because he's disappeared, but he was the secretary of the Radharaman temple. His name was Gaur Krishna Goswami. And his grandfather was Madhusudan Das Goswami, who was a close friend of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He greatly supported Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And then his father, Damodar Das Goswami, all of the Radharaman Goswamis would come right into the same, from generation to generation, from Bhaktivinoda Thakur down to Srila Prabhupada, and then Vishwambar Goswami. So Gaur Krishna Goswami, he was studying Sanskrit. So he would also come, and he was invited to, Prabhupada invited him to his home, and they went to the cinema together to see that movie about Lord Chaitanya. He was a young boy at that time. And then when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati used to come here with the Brajmanda Parikrama, they would have Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati speak at the Lala Babu Mandir, and he would speak in Sanskrit. And Gaur Krishna Goswami, he became inspired by hearing him, that I also want to speak in Sanskrit like him. So, and Prabhupada and his father, they would sit together, because his house is right next to the Radharaman temple. And they would sit together with rough paper, and every day he would come and they would discuss the translations for the Srimad Bhagavatam. And they only had one pencil, so they would share the pencil back and forth. And Gaur Krishna Goswami would watch his father and Prabhupada sitting together so intently for hours, translating Srimad Bhagavatam together. So this is where Prabhupada made his future contacts for spreading Krishna consciousness. None of them knew at that time. They thought that Prabhupada was just a very respectable Bengali gentleman who was running a business there in Allahabad. And then 30 years later, when they saw that Prabhupada came back and established ISKCON, they were just amazed. They were so honored. And they just saw that here's someone, we knew him for so many years, and now he has accomplished the order of his spiritual master. So this is Dr. Ghosh's concept of Prabhupada. Abai was a business-minded man. We were all God-fearing, of course. In every home we have a small temple, and we must have deities. But he used to always talk about business and how to meet family expenses. Now, Prabhupada at that time, his pharmacy had become so successful that he started opening up branches in different cities. Lucknow, then he went to Bombay, and all over he was traveling, and he was making big contacts. And other companies, they were approaching him to become their representative. Because Prabhupada, he knew how to do the business perfectly. Now, later, much later, his godbrothers, they would say about Prabhupada, yes, he was a very good businessman, and he also taught his disciples how to become good businessmen. And Prabhupada said, they think that I'm a karmi. But Prabhupada, he knew through Yukta Vairagya, he knew how to use business in order to push forward Krishna consciousness. And you have the example here, in the very early days, Prabhupada used to have the devotees go out and get jobs to support the temple, like Jayananda, who was our ISKCON saint. He used to drive a taxi, but he gave Prabhupada $5,000 to print teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And he had Garga Muni start the Spiritual Sky Incense, which was supporting all of our temples. So Prabhupada knew how to use everything. And Prabhupada said that management is archanam. He said within the 9 processes, management is archanam. So Prabhupada, he was able to see everything. And even with his family, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, a pure devotee, because at the end of Prabhupada's life, his family, 5 children, 3 sons, 2 daughters, a wife, they expected that Prabhupada would support him, give them some pension. And Prabhupada decided, yes, they're thinking that I'm the father and I should support them, so we'll make a pension for them. And he said that it was very strict. They could not touch the money. Simply every month, something would be given to them. And at the time of their death, that money would go back to the society. And every property that was in Prabhupada's name belonged to ISKCON. So Prabhupada was very expert in every aspect of management, in business, in spiritual life, everything. He was most expert at everything. Okay, so this is why Prabhupada was talking about business, because he was thinking how could he expand to help with the Gaudiya Math, not only just maintain his family. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that a pure devotee, whatever he does is on the spiritual platform, although it may appear to be that he's taking care of his family, he's doing his business, but the pure devotee is always, Prabhupada said, there was never a time that I did not forget Krishna. So from his childhood, from his birth, he was a pure devotee. Although at home Abai wore a kurta and dhoti, sometimes for business he would dress in shirt and pants. He was a good-looking, full-mustached, energetic young man in his late 20s. He and Radharani Dey now had 2 children. A daughter was born after they had been in Allahabad 1 year. Gaur Mahan, who was now 75, had come to live with him and had Abai's widowed sister, Rajeshwari, and her son, Tulsi, as had. So Prabhupada was so wealthy at that time that he even bought a car. And cars, only the richest people had cars. They cost like 6,000 rupees, which is a huge amount of money. So he got a very nice Chevrolet car, or no, excuse me, a Buick. And Gaur Mahan said, well, this is very good because Tulsi, his nephew, He could become a driver and use it as a taxi, and plus we'll have the car for our own family uses. So Prabhupada, he was completely successful in his business. He said these were golden days. He was making so much money. But there was one problem, and that was Prabhupada's compassion. So he had a huge business all over North India, but he would give the medicines on credit, and the people were not paying. So after some time, there was a 10,000 rupee debt to Dr. K.C. Bose. And the managers who Prabhupada had risen above them, they were still envious of Prabhupada because Prabhupada had become so successful. And they convinced Dr. Bose that, you see, he owes you so much money. This is because he's only selling his own products, and he's not selling your products. So Dr. Bose, he went to see Prabhupada, and they made an agreement. They said, now you have a great successful network of so many clients, but you owe us so much money. So now you take your Prayag pharmacy and you give that back to me, and you can keep all of your other clients. So in that way, you see, Prabhupada, he was at the pinnacle of success in his career, but Krishna completely smashed it because Krishna did not want him to become a successful businessman. Prabhupada said that if he had continued, and if he had taken the offers of the other companies, Smith and all of the the British companies that were approaching him, he would have been the wealthiest man in the whole pharmaceutical industry. But Krishna smashed the whole thing and caused him to just give up on this notion of becoming very wealthy. Abai led a busy... Gormahan mostly stayed at home, chanted on his beads, and worshipped the Shalagram Shila deity of Krishna. He was satisfied that Abai was doing right, and Abai was satisfied to have his father living comfortably with him and freely worshipping Krishna. Abai led a busy life. He was intent on building his business. By 8 a.m., he would go to his pharmacy where he would meet Dr. Ghosh and begin his day's work. At noon, he would come home. I think there's more pictures to show. Yeah, this is the pharmacy, which is very close to his residence. Next picture? Yes. Now, after Prabhupada left his residence, at that same area, just at his house, the Bengali residents there, they opened up a Prayag Hari Sabha, and there they had a Khanda Kirtan for many, many years. So that whole area became purified by Prabhupada's presence there. And this, just nearby, is the Gaudiya Math, the Rupa Gaudiya Math. Just 1 kilometer away from the Sangam. It's very nicely situated, and we'll hear probably in the next day about how Srila Prabhupada came in contact with the Gaudiya Math there while he was running his pharmacy in Allahabad. Hare Krishna. Jai.